Hey everyone, welcome to week 5 of the college football season. Things are moving right along. My name is Mike Browning. I'm the host of CFBRoadTrip.com. Last week, not a great week for me after the 8-2 previous week. Last week I went 5-5, but hopefully this week we could do a little bit better. Quick reminder before we get into the picks, I have my Fresno State trip posted on my website, cfbroadtrip.com. Go take a look at everything I did while I was in Fresno State. Over the next few days, I should be able to get the UCLA stadium report up there, so take a look at that as well. Some more information on that next week. So with that said, let's go ahead and just get started with this week's picks. We're going to start off with a couple of Friday night games. Our first one is a Big Ten matchup. We have number 12 Penn State going to Maryland. So Penn State is one of those teams that, at least so far this year, has kind of been under the radar. They had one close win against Pitt, so I think not that many people are taking them seriously. And I think Penn State's probably going to like that for the most part, not being spoken of and that much news being under the radar. And I think that's going to continue this week with a victory. So I'm going to pick Penn State to win at Maryland on Friday night. Our next Friday night game takes us out Pac-12 after dark. You never know what's going to happen there, as you saw from last week's UCLA-Washington State game. But this week, Friday night, we have Arizona State traveling to number 15 Cal. And saying number 15 before Cal is probably one of the big surprises of the season. I totally underestimated how good Cal would be. And I think that Cal's going to be able to keep this momentum going. Arizona State, although they only have one loss in the season, has struggled in a couple games. So I think Cal will have all the momentum going into this game. So I'm going to pick Arizona State to lose. Number 15 Cal over Arizona State Friday night. So let's move to our Saturday games. Our first one is a top 25 matchup. We have number 18 Virginia going to number 10 Notre Dame. As you know, Notre Dame obviously lost last week to Georgia, but they stayed competitive throughout. On the flip side, Virginia, although they're undefeated, struggled mightily, especially in the first half against Old Dominion. That really doesn't bode well for them, especially going on the road. So I'm going to pick Notre Dame to win this game. Notre Dame over Virginia. Let's go back to the Pac-12 for our next top 25 matchup. We have number 21 USC traveling to number 17 Washington. I think a lot of people probably counted USC out after their early season loss. Washington also has a loss on the season, but I think Washington kind of turned things around by blowing out BYU last week, and I think they're going to be able to keep this momentum going this week. So I'm going to pick Washington to beat USC at home in Pac-12 play. Let's go to ACC play. Wake Forest is another undefeated team. They're going to Boston College. We know Boston College has their kind of embarrassing loss to Kansas a couple of weeks ago. They were able to bounce back last week. Wake Forest, I think, is a team that, although they're 4-0, they're probably not quite as good as the record indicates. But with that said, I do think they are going to be able to go to Boston College this week and pull out a win. So I'm going to pick Wake Forest with the victory over Boston College in the ACC play. Let's go to a Big 12 matchup next. We have Iowa State traveling to Baylor. Iowa State, we know, has a loss on the season to Iowa, but they were able to kind of put things together last week in their blowout victory. Baylor is an undefeated team, but if you saw last week, they struggled, especially in the second half against Rice. So the question is, what team is for real? And I think that team is going to be Iowa State. I think Iowa State has put things together. I think the Iowa matchup probably kind of put things in perspective for them on what they needed to do to improve. So I'm going to pick Iowa State to win this game at Baylor this week. Let's go to an SEC matchup next. We have Mississippi State traveling to number 7 Auburn. Auburn looked pretty good against Texas A&M last week. That was one that I picked wrong. I thought A&M would get that victory, so props to Auburn for doing what they needed to do to get out College Station with a win. Mississippi State, did pull out a win over Kentucky last week, which is another matchup that I missed last week. But this week, I think Auburn at home is going to have enough to pull out this win. I think they have a lot of momentum on this side, especially coming out of that A&M win. So I'm going to pick Auburn to beat Mississippi State at home in SEC. Let's go to another Big 12 matchup. We have number 24 Kansas State traveling to Oklahoma State. Saying 24 ahead of Kansas State is another number I wasn't expecting. I think Kansas State has surprised a lot of people with how well they've played so well in this season, especially with the victory over Mississippi State. But Oklahoma State is such a good team, especially at home. They did lose to Texas last week, but it was a very close matchup. I think Oklahoma State will bounce back this week by pulling off the win over Kansas State. So Oklahoma State over Kansas State at home in Big 12 play this week. Let's go to a Big 10 matchup next. We have number 5 Ohio State traveling to Nebraska. This is where College Game Day is going to be this week. Ohio State, for some reason, does always seem to struggle on the road at a Big 12 West opponent each year. The question is, will they do it against Nebraska this week? Nebraska did pull off the win against Illinois last week, but they struggled along the way. They had to pull it out at the very end. That doesn't bode well going against a top 5 team like Ohio State. I think Ohio State will come out of this victory with a victory, actually a pretty large victory this week. Ohio State over Nebraska in Big 10 play. In our final matchup this week, we're going to go back to another Pac-12 after dark. Washington State is traveling to Utah. I've already mentioned how Washington State blew an amazing lead to UCLA this week. I think they're going to go into Utah with a chip on their shoulder this week after the way they lost last week. And Utah, although they looked good in a couple matchups, they really haven't put it all together yet. And I think that Washington State, because of that, will pull off this week's victory on the road at Utah. So Washington State over Utah in Pac-12 play. So those are my 10 games for this week. Again, hopefully I pull things out a little bit better than I did last week over with the 5-5 record. I think things will turn around. Thanks everybody for watching, as you always do every week. Let's go out. Let's enjoy the games. We'll come back next week for week 6. Have a great week, everybody.